keynote looking at digital assets on the world stage, a space that, as you've heard just now, continuing to evolve at record speed. This year, more than 3/4 of institutional investors all plan to boost their digital asset allocations. And the UK is doubling down on its ambition to be a global leader. We've heard today about the new regulations, the unified approach to stablecoins and staking services coming online later this year. Of course, it's not just about crypto. We've also see the convergence of AI and blockchain driving smarter, more secure, and more stable systems. So global standards, interoperability, we continue to hear that word, remain major hurdles. So let's hear this final future-focused discussion. Please welcome our moderator, partner at Latham and Watkins, Stuart Davies, and his panel.
Hi everyone, thanks for attending. I think we're in the coolest room in the building on a hot day, which is great. We've got a great panel ahead of us today. Pretty short, we've got 20 minutes to get through it all, to solve a complex question. So it's going to be fast and furious, but high quality. Got a very esteemed panel of guests here in no particular order. I'll do the intros and then kick straight into it. So we're joined by Katie Harries, who's Director of International Policy at Coinbase. Tamara, Milne, Chief Digital Officer at Acrisure, Lord Ed Vaizey, Member of the House of Lords, and Devina, Chief Financial Officer and Deputy CEO at Zumo. So welcome. Tamara, I'm going to kick it off with you as the American on the panel.
As well.
We've seen some pretty incredible change in the UK digital assets space with the new administration. It seems like we've gone from an enforcement-led, pretty impermissive environment to a very permissive environment, regulatory enforcement actions being pulled, a stablecoin executive order, which is very, very permissive, and stablecoin bill on the way. What is happening in the US, and what can we expect going forward?
It's a great question. If the question really is, can I predict what the Trump administration is going to do? I think I have a very different job, so I am not going to try to predict that, but I will give you hopefully some data points that can help kind of guide that conversation. So if you look back, the first Trump administration was 2017, and his position at that point was, I would say, fairly anti-crypto. So he has clearly transcended from that original point in his second term, which started this year. And so in terms of motivation and direction, I think there's question around where that pivot came and fundamentally kind of what's the objective. But it's definitely clear that it has changed in the conversations, the way he's delivering it. So I think the positive on that end is that there is a conversation. Decisions will be made. In terms of timing, it sounds like the end of the summer, we'll have some legislation changes and some directive. The challenge, I would say the opportunity, is there's definitely some questions or concerns around the consumer being kind of at the forefront of decision-making around those policies. And so I think that will continue to be some fears that exist across the industry and across the US.
Thank you. I mean, it really feels like there's been a U-turn across every area of sort of US government and regulation. Regulators coming out pro-crypto stance, the Fed, Congress, and obviously the President. Lord Vaizey, do you think that this pro-crypto stance will have a knock-on impact in other countries, and in particular in the UK?
Yes, I'm sure it will. I mean, I'm obviously not a huge fan of President Trump or his way of doing business or his administration and the way they go about business, and we can all speculate as to why there has been a volte-face. But I think that on this position, the administration has got itself into the right place in theory. We'll see what happens in practice, which is that crypto needs to be regulated, and countries, it is always a paradox, particularly when you're a politician, to try and persuade people that actually regulation can often give a country a competitive advantage. And too often, businesses see regulation as a way of building a moat around the incumbents or a way of adding burdens to business, but particularly in financial services, good regulation is a fantastic way of attracting investment and growing businesses. So clearly, crypto needs proper regulation, and clearly the US is the leading jurisdiction to put forward that regulation. And it's interesting, given that Rachel Reeves has published her regulation, her kind of draft legislation today, how different regulators around the world work in lockstep. And we all know that, broadly speaking, there are 3, 4, 5 maybe financial regulators, at least as far as the Western world is concerned, who matter, who are respected, places like the UK, but also places like Singapore. And it's important that there's a dialogue between them. But there is no doubt at all that when the US administration decides to change its mind and take a lead in an area like this, it will make the weather.
Fantastic. And you mentioned the new UK legislation. What that does is it sets the regulatory perimeter. It says what regulated activities, what instruments within the crypto space will be regulated. And then it leaves for the individual regulators, so the FCA and the PRA, to develop the conduct rules that firms will need to then abide by. I'm not going to question any of you because it was published about an hour ago. But Katie...
You've all read it.
Well, I haven't. No, I'm joking. But I guess, Katie, what would you like to see in there coming out of, say, the US? And also, let's not forget the EU published the world's first comprehensive crypto assets regime as well, and MiCA has taken probably a slightly different approach to the US. Is there anything that you would like to see the UK adopt as maybe a second or third mover?
Yeah, sure. I'm just going to pick up on some of the comments that have been made by my fellow panelists. I think there is perhaps a perception that the administration in the US can be potentially kind of slightly chaotic or unpredictable. But I can tell you that everything that we're hearing from our colleagues in the US, that this is anything but chaotic. This is a very bold, kind of concerted approach, and there's absolutely coordination across the administration, across the different agencies, from the White House, the CFTC, the SEC. And there is absolutely going to be a kind of seismic shift in terms of regulatory approach. So moving away from the kind of regulatory by enforcement, we're getting regulatory clarity. But more broadly, I think just generally when we look around at other jurisdictions, there's been very much a focus on regulating for kind of risk, and that's absolutely appropriate and needed. But I think what the US is doing differently is that they're also looking at how to capture the economic benefits of this new technology. And I think that's really important in terms of capitalizing on the opportunities. Just kind of going back again to in terms of what the US is doing, which I think is particularly impactful. I think the first move is around kind of tokenization in financial markets. I think the US has recognized this is going to absolutely drive transformative changes for capital markets, for IPOs, in kind of private capital markets as well. And they want to get to be in the absolute forefront of that. And I think what we're seeing in other jurisdictions in the UK and the US is that we've kind of got pilot regimes, we've got sandboxes, which may take many years. It's always kind of a question of how firms kind of transition out of sandboxes. What we're seeing in the US is that they're using rule changes, they're using interpretations to move towards real-world application of tokenization. So really putting their foot on the pedal and driving what I think will transform global capital markets. The second kind of change that we're seeing in the US, which I think is super important, and we're hearing this across multiple different panels today, which I think is fantastic, which is on stablecoins. So very critically, the US has ruled out CBDC in part for kind of privacy concerns for government-led digital money. They want the private sector to innovate. But I think most importantly because they recognize that stablecoins are the only on-chain settlement asset that is currently in existence. So if you want tokenization in financial markets, you have to embrace stablecoins. And in the EU, for example, they're still kind of debating around CBDCs. In the UK, you have the Bank of England, which has published a proposal wanting to effectively prohibit the use of stablecoins for wholesale settlement. I really struggle to see how the UK and the City of London in particular can compete around tokenizations if it's not going to embrace stablecoins. So you heard the previous panelists talk about the kind of cliff edge effect and the Bank of England changing its proposals. I think this is one of the kind of key areas that we need to see change. We need the Bank of England, we need the UK to embrace stablecoins wholeheartedly, including in capital markets.
Yeah, I think you can't overstate the importance of having both the cash leg and the securities leg on chain. And it's interesting hearing the Chancellor talk about the importance of liquidity in private markets and the PICES infrastructure, which I think is a really important development. But the US, leapfrogs that. We're now starting to see the potential to have, tokenized securities on a DeFi infrastructure, which is quite fascinating. Davina, it's likely that there will be a divergence between the EU's approach with MiCA, which was very kind of look at TradFi and implement something that looks similar, accounting for the idiosyncrasies of digital assets. And the US's much more bold approach, as we've just heard from Katie. What should the UK be doing to sort of bridge that gap? Should it be trying to, or should it be focusing more on its own financial regulatory position, which is probably closer to the EU?
So I think the benefit that the UK has is we've now, and certainly will have with UK regs coming in, we'll have so many more data points, and actually from both sides of the spectrum. So we can see what works well, what doesn't. And we, at Zumo, we held a round table at Paris Blockchain Week a couple of weeks ago. And the feedback, and that was with legislators of MiCA, that was with, firms who are kind of implementing MiCA as well. And their big statement to us was the UK needs to do what the UK always does, which is make great regulation. So I think what we need to do is look at what happens. I don't think we already know, according to the FCA, their roadmap, we know that the regulatory regime is going to go live at the end of 2026. So I think that gives us enough time to look at what happens in the US, to look at the pain points that the people who are implementing MiCA are going through as well, and take those lessons. I think that's going to be really important.
Yeah, that makes sense to me as well. Tamara, going back to you, I guess your background is in banking and traditional finance. Maybe it's sort of harsh to say, but I think maybe there's a feeling that TradFi has been a bit slower in terms of adoption than sort of true native crypto asset platforms. If you see the growth and size and scale of some of those platforms, what do you think is needed in order for TradFi to catch up and adopt digital assets as a technology?
So in terms of looking at the industry specifically, kind of institutional, financial institutions, to the kind of varying degrees of regulation, obviously crypto or alternative investments, et cetera. I think that as you look at the industry itself, there's substantial challenges that relates to the lack of regulation, guiding confidence to then further kind of the focus of the ability for institutional finance to, in essence, be able to address and or align their investment community to the opportunity. And so a lot of, in terms of opportunity, defining the regulations, as Katie has pointed out, is helpful. Just direction to have clarity on that, because at the end of the day, each one of these institutions has to set up the ability to manage it from a technical perspective, and their own policies, procedures, et cetera. So the more directive and clarity you can get, the better opportunity also exists. In addition to that, part of the commentary from Katie as well around tokenization, I think widespread across the capital markets, particularly in the kind of under-optimized financial products, there's significant opportunity there. And the more that is adopted and leveraged across the institutions, I think the easier it is to adopt it in some of these pockets, particularly in the crypto and digital asset space, because of the ambiguity that maybe exists in terms of knowledge and exposure, and the infancy of basically as an asset class. So you think about it in that directive. But I think that there's significant, obviously, movement and direction helping kind of guide that, which is certainly going to add significant value, but also adoption and further kind of push that down the path.
I guess in terms of pushing it down the path, Lord Vaizey, is a time we depart from sandboxes and the kind of European approach post-Brexit. Do we have an opportunity now to go it alone and do something really innovative in this space?
Yes, we do. I mean, I'm a passionate Remainer. I thought Brexit was a completely insane thing for this country to have done. But I do accept that the one sort of potential light at the end of the tunnel is in financial services, where we remain a world leader. And I also think, paradoxically, bizarrely, if you like, that President Trump has potentially done the UK a huge favour where we can become this incredible kind of haven for people who are fleeing political persecution in the US, and people want to live in a stable environment, and that includes global financial leaders. So I think a bold government and a well-resourced regulator could really strike out in terms of innovative regulation. And a couple of people on the panel have already referenced the UK's reputation in this area, but I feel it's a reputation that has been gradually declining. I don't think we've resourced the FCA nearly enough. I don't think the leadership has been bold enough. It's been a safety-first policy, and it's been a slow lane policy to avoid any kind of catastrophic errors. And it's very different to what things were 10 or 15 years ago, when the UK really was making the weather in terms of fintech regulation and financial services regulation. The fact that Innovate Finance exists at all is actually a legacy of what was going on 10 years ago, and we need to rediscover that pioneering spirit, and we need to be bold, and we need to remember that we have this incredible reputation, and the world trusts the UK to get this stuff right and to be thoughtful about it, but also to be pioneering and innovative.
And Katie, Devina, I'm going to ask you the same question to wrap up. As you work for two great businesses in this space. If you had one thing on your wish list that you could adopt to harness this technology, be competitive with, say, the US and the EU, what would that one thing be?
Yeah, well, I think we've heard across a number of panels many of the opportunities afforded by the technology, whether it's tokenization or stablecoins. But actually, I think what the UK really needs to do is draw all the strands together. And I would love to see kind of a blockchain action plan. We had very positive remarks from the Chancellor this afternoon, but we have further publications coming out ahead of the summer around industrial strategy, how to make the city more competitive. I would love to see a plan that draws together stablecoins, tokenization, but much more broadly, how we can use the blockchain as an underlying technology to drive growth, jobs, innovation across the economy. And I mean that in terms of the provision of public services. I mean the small businesses that are building on the blockchain, driving kind of jobs and growth and driving real-world use cases, but also the intersection of AI and blockchain technology, which is a whole topic in itself. And I would love the government to recognize all these benefits of the technology, draw them together, and to publish a blockchain action plan with a crypto SAR to deliver on it as part of the industrial strategy.
I love that.
That's my wish.
So we've had the national payments vision, we're going to have the national blockchain vision. Devina.
I'd probably expand on or extend on what Katie said. I think, look, we're seeing this momentum in the US because we have, I think it's 290 Congress members who are pro-crypto out of 535. So they are driving this legislation forward, and that's going to be really important. What the Americans are saying, I believe, is that they're saying that actually we need to lead in this technology to win in years to come. And we probably need some of that in the UK as well. So I think it was brought up in the previous panel, you know, more of that upskilling, understanding within government. It's great to have Lord Vaizey here on this panel, but it would be great to have a panel full of legislators actually really knowing the space.
It'd be great to have someone who knew what he was talking about.
I wouldn't say that in public.
You're right, but there are legislators. I mean, I'm trying to get the all-party group on digital currencies getting up and running, and there are lots of legislators who are interested in this. So, but you're right. I mean, I think the point you're making about the Congress people is the right point. Whereas they don't get much publicity or airtime. The legislators are interested in this, and they need forums from companies like yours to bring them all together, bring them out in the open.
Absolutely.
Well, I think we've run out of time. Thank you so much for bearing with us for the last session of the day, I think. We will see you at the drinks, hopefully later.